Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to KASS Live. Of course, I'm Jim Flynn, and we're grateful you're joining us for a focused conversation with House Education Chair Scott Lewis on the road ahead for Kentucky public education and our students. Kentucky has some real momentum, stronger communities, a growing economy, and some meaningful steps forward in reading, math, school safety, and pension stability, just to name a few. And today is about building on that momentum with practical, bipartisan solutions that keep student learning workforce success at the center of every decision. And so, Chairman Lewis, thanks for your leadership, and thanks for joining us this morning. And so let's dive in. We do feel like, Kentucky's economy's been on an uptick and communities are growing stronger every year. And as you look ahead to 2026 and the legislative session, how do you see public education, fueling and sustaining this economic momentum across our wonderful Commonwealth?
Well, Jim, I really do think that we're doing a better job in our upper grades and our high school level of meeting some of the needs of the business community. So that's the things that are in product is allowing some of this growth, because obviously in these communities, you got to have workers. So, I think we are doing a better job with our dual credit, our ATCs and our vocational centers, talking to business leaders, community leaders on what the needs of particular communities are. So I think that's something we can build on. And I think as a legislative body, I think you all have seen that we put quite a bit of money in that area with our ATCs and vocational centers. So I think we can continue our momentum with that, and then maybe focus some of our other means and monies on where we need them in the lower grades.
Yeah, absolutely. Big wins there, and hope we can keep that momentum going, because really, at the end of the day, the name of the game is, preparing for kids for success in life.
Exactly.
After high school, as citizens, as individuals, as members of a family, a community, and the workforce. And I think we make some meaningful steps there. And of course, we know, the big prize of this session is the budget. That's always, in a budget session, going to be the number one priority. It fuels everything. But we've talked about ways to continue growing the focus of a personalized learning experience for every student. And, I've always said over and over, and I've heard this from others, that, the system's always designed perfectly for the results we're getting. And it's simply a function of the policy environment within which it operates. And so there's been this growing bipartisan interest in modernizing Kentucky's accountability system, to give parents real-time insights into whether students are on track and growing, to ensure our communities have a voice in defining success locally. All of our communities are unique, and to balance these innovations with statewide priorities like transition readiness that you just mentioned, with kind of non-negotiable priorities in reading and math and graduation. But what parts of this United We Learn vision have traction heading into the 26th session, and which areas may need more discussion or refinement, and how do you see this advancing in the months ahead?
Well, obviously I get a lot of feedback, and this is, one of the topics we've been working on. There's a group of us been working on this for the last few months and sort of gathering data and talking to people or whatever. But here's going to be the hardest thing to do. The hardest thing is going to be to change to that currently within this time frame, and a couple of reasons why. We don't know what the federal government's going to do yet. Okay, so we probably need to wait and see how that's going to play out, to see, okay, maybe all these regulations are going to be off of us now, and we can actually do something really, really meaningful. So that's one piece. Another piece, the plan presented costs a lot of money, Jim, and I don't know that that's going to be an easy sell for us this time, to go over to the accountability plan that was submitted by the commissioner. But here's what I think. If we can't do anything else within the time or the framework that we have, if we can just get change to growth, get some kind of grade level equivalency with that, get our results in a timely manner that we can actually use them, and maybe reduce some time that it takes taking the test right now. And so that's some things I jotted down that and I do need your all's feedback, because if a majority of the people don't think we need to go to growth, I need to hear that, because I personally think that would help us with our ESL situation that we have, in maybe our special needs, where we can actually measure the kids that we have. We're not always going to get those kids to proficient or distinguished, but that those kids may not have the capability to be there, but we can measure the growth that we give them after they get to us. So that's some of my thinking on there. Not saying that we won't try to get this other done, but I'm saying if we can't get, all that pieces, that's some of the pieces that would be wins for us.
Well, I think, just in terms of, kind of feedback I've heard is, strong support for growth, a strong sentiment, for some kind of grade level performance clarity and designation, because, that's what parents want to know.
Exactly.
And a lot of your colleagues even confuse
Yes.
efficiency and grade level
Right.
performance. And so having something that does that, and of course, getting the results back in a time frame that makes them useful,
Right.
are things I consistently hear. And certainly there's, some interest in, giving local communities some official voice in it, though, there's different ideas about, should the state be involved in that or not? I do think that community voice is important, and we all know that community gets the schools it wants, and when they're engaged and committed, our schools can thrive. And so I think there is interest
Yeah.
from some avenue for that.
Well, and there's certainly interest from some in our group too, but from the feedback I've gotten, that may be the hardest sell, to give that an accountability grade or a performance grade or whatever. I think it's a great idea, and honestly, in some of our districts now, we're already doing that. Something that's been brought up to the group that we've got is, let's have that every couple of years, some kind of community forum where it's a check mark, and we've gotten all the business community together, all the citizens, and we talk about what they think our school system should look like, and then let people develop their own type of deal, and maybe not have it in the accountability system for a grade, but just that we are doing that. So that's some of the feedback I've gotten. I think community involvement's very important, and if you'll go down through the list of our school districts, usually the ones that have good community involvement have a good school system.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, looking forward to those conversations, because I think even among superintendents, on kind of that local accountability piece, there's still, some that are looking for more clarity and understanding about what that
Right.
is. And so I think as we continue down that road, it'll be fruitful to have those conversations. One of the other big things that I hear, and certainly connected to the budget policy as well, is strengthening the educator workforce. Superintendents are hiring still large numbers of teachers without pre-service preparation. It leads to challenges with turnover, classroom management, safety, all those kinds of things, not to mention the impact it has on student learning and just the cost of districts, because these people miss more school, they quit, before their contracts are up, and all that costs money. So what legislative tools or strategies could help strengthen both pre-service preparation and the alternative certification pathways that build on what you passed recently?
Well, I think, yeah, our recent, was it our last budget? I think is when we got loan forgiveness and teacher stipends, student teacher
Mhm.
stipends. So we've had a couple wins there, and we need to build up on that. But I really believe in our districts, Jim, and I don't know how we go about it, funding it. It's going to have to be maybe a state local partnership or something. But we know. Here's what I think. I think we know who our best science and math teachers are, our science and math students are. I think we're going to have to recruit those in our local districts. And we know the ones that would be able to, have the personality to be teachers, and maybe some of them don't. But you know what? We raise all kinds of money for athletic funds for in our local districts. We need to have some academic funds where we offer our brightest, best and brightest, that would make wonderful chemistry teachers or math teachers or
Mhm.
so forth. And
Yep.
we need to pay their way. We need to pay their way. If we really want the best and the brightest, we're going to have to find out a way, lump them with other scholarships or something in that area. And we know they would have an interest coming back usually because they're from our districts. But there's nobody better to know that than us. And we're going to have to change the rhetoric. I mean, and I understand how it's gotten the way it is, where we've got teachers telling their kids not to go into education. I lived that. 2018, 19, 20 was one of the worst years I had in Frankfurt because I was constantly butting heads with people telling us how bad we were and how we needed this. Teachers aren't worth anything, and you know we pay them this. It's not about money and so forth. So I do think we're going to have to change some of that, and it's going to start with us. And I really believe that there's some way we need to work out partnerships where we're retaining our best and brightest in our own communities.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, one of the exciting developments since last session was the state's designation of education as a top five in-demand work sector. And I think there's some opportunities maybe to
Hmm.
leverage this designation to deepen that, educator bench, so to speak. But there is some misalignment. For example, work ready scholarships don't apply to bachelor's degrees and above, which that's our
Hmm.
workforce, right?
Yeah.
And so do you see some opportunities maybe to make some changes to qualify education for those work ready scholarships or some other similar support mechanism, maybe provide high school students with more dual credit scholarship opportunities if they're in the educator career pathways and things like that?
Well, I think, I think that was important that we got that designation. And we're facing that in some of these districts that are already doing this grow your own. Nelson County was one of them. And, I went and visited there, and they talked about, if they had that other 2 years of funding, how many more teachers, that we could get out of that. The problem is now when we change where kids have to take the FAFSA and more kids are taking the FAFSA, then there's all of a sudden there's less funds in the pool. So we're getting more and more demand and less funds in the pool off the lottery money. Now, I do think, the sports gambling and some of that, I would hope that maybe we could earmark some of that money that we're getting extra, because I'm told right now we've not even used that money. So, we're going to have to look for ways to fund what's important and convince the people that are in charge of the purse strings that those are important items.
Yeah. Well, I know Senator Higdon has a bill that would do the educator career pathway piece
Hmm.
that I'm interested to see, and I think there's some opportunities there. But this is something we want to keep the conversation on and get your help
Yes.
with. The last piece on the workforce is, I think it was in maybe the 24th session, you created that new teacher onboarding induction framework. Last session kind of tweaked it a little bit, gave some flexibility, but it never was funded. The funding mechanism was stripped out of that. Also, there's been some real discussion about understanding the importance of the principal leadership in a thriving school. And in fact, Chair West in the Senate Ed last session had that OEA report kind of differentiating high performing schools with struggling schools, and no surprise to us, leadership and culture were the keys there, and so there's some
Hmm.
interest in maybe putting stuff back in place to support principals, and so do you see some potential there for a targeted investment to support both new teacher onboarding, induction, and principal
I
support?
do, Jim. I really think just talking, some of the meetings I've had with Senator West, I do think there's going to be some movement on that this time, and I think they're going to carry that in the Senate.
Yeah, well, I think that'd be huge, and we all know, what high quality professionals want and need, and one of those pieces that can support that it is a robust framework for onboarding and induction. So look forward to those conversations as well. Well, let's move to the big prize, the budget. And we've had two really pretty good budgets in a row, particularly this last budget cycle. With the adjustment of the seat base to reflect an increase in both years of the biennium, the increase in the tier one investment, increase in transportation funding. And so we want to build on that, and then also, continue to see the commitment to funding TRS and the Medical Insurance Trust Fund, which is very close to 100% funded, as you know. So, but we've kind of used this analogy of we used to rob Peter to pay Paul. We Now it seems like we've been robbing Paul to pay Peter, and we got to figure out how to pay Peter and Paul. And so invest in the TRS Medical Insurance Trust Fund and Seek, because Seek is the prize, because that's where we invest in classrooms. That's where we can invest in more competitive pay for our education professionals. So what do you see in the future here, a path for Kentucky to ensure we fully support both strong pensions and strong classrooms?
Well, I think Jim, number one is I think we're going to have to start asking for targeted investments, meaning that we know where the money's going to go. I've heard that a lot up there, and I tend to agree with some of that. But our health insurance fund is going to be 100% funded here shortly, and I know you're aware of a bill that we passed that sort of snuck up on us, and I think I ended up voting no on it when it come back to us. Was that money, once it got 100% funded, would go back into just the general fund, I think is the way or that was written. But I thought there was a chance for us then to say, okay, we know this is going to be 100% funded. What are we going to do with that money that these teachers have been paying in? It would have been a good way to give money to some of the things that we've talked about. It would have been a good way to give money to districts for every teacher to get a 1-2% raise out of that. We're going to give one back to them, or 2% back, or so forth. So I do think that as we're moving along, and I have to brag on our caucus. We've done a really good job showing that pension system up. And there was a time, when I first got up there in 18, I really thought, that we were in trouble that first year, and we were, and there was enough of us up there fighting. I think that helped that situation out. But I think we're in a place now where we won't hear much more about pensions. I think they made their play. They tried to do what they tried to do, and it didn't work. And so, but I do think it's an opportunity for us to say, okay, the pension's in pretty good shape now. Do we have to fund $500 million to it every time we get a chance, or can we fund $400 million to it? And can we use this other 100 million for targeted investments in our public schools?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and one of the messages, of course, we've talked about, trying to return us back to that 2008 buying power. And of course, you and
Yeah.
I were both superintendents then, and we would both, I'm sure, share that, we weren't flush with money
No.
then, but the gap between educator salaries and private sector counterparts was much more narrow. which allowed us to pull those high quality folks in.
Right.
I contend that when that's too wide, which since 2008 it's just widened and widened,
Hmm.
that kind of caused some of those folks that used to come into education to pause and say, I don't think I can do that anymore. So,
Yeah.
so that's why it's so important. But to your point, when we define, a $300 increase for the seat base over the next 4 years, that can be reflected in specific targeted investments. For example, transportation. Last time I think you all intended to fund it 100%. It ended up being 2 years in arrears instead of 1 year in arrears. And so it felt more like a 70-something%
Hmm.
investment versus 100%. And so if we can move that investment to 1 year in arrears, that will help. If we can maybe look at dialing the tier one a little bit more and close that gap between the haves and have-nots a bit, even though tier one helps almost everyone. And then look at the add-ons, like special ed and EL to reflect those actual costs, and even some moving some static investments like SROs, mental health supports, and gifted and talented, funding into a more dynamic, maybe add-on approach. So, there's some opportunities in addition to what we've already talked about with, maybe more dual credit investment for education career pathways and supports for new teachers and new principals. Is that what you're talking about? Those kinds of specific targeted investments that we have in our platform?
Yes. And I think it gives us a better selling point if we can always just say, okay, well, we need X more amounts of dollars in seek, but we don't say why. You know what I'm saying? We can
Mm-hmm.
say, well, increase in costs or whatever, but if we said it's going specifically for ESS, for third grade reading, that we want all of our third graders, if they made it to the third grade and they're not reading on grade level, we want to be able to hire some people to come in and work with the ones we've got and try to get them on grade level. But just those type of things. And you mentioned transportation. If we don't get anything else, we need to get 100% transportation this time. And our people have already voted thinking they did that. Okay, so that'll be an easier sell. We've already had that vote where we thought, and then the numbers come back, and it was, it ended up being a mess. We thought we didn't think we got the right numbers, and so you got a lot of that back and forth going on. But I think that's number one thing we asked for, and that'll allow, and it'd be interesting to me, and maybe your people can help me with that, Jim, if they could get that to you. If we win 100% transportation, how much money would that free up in the districts? And
Right.
they can calculate that. I know when I was superintendent, we were at 52% funded, I think, my last year, and we were fifth largest district countywide, and it was several $100,000 a year that I could have been using to reduce class size or whatever that we
Give a
thought
nice
we needed.
raise or something. Yeah.
Yeah, anything. So anyway, that would be something that we could use.
Well, that's something
Uh,
we can talk about and try to give you some evidence to support that case. So anyway, but
and then also we can support it, but being that we can use that money to do this.
that's
We
right.
can use that money in our districts to do this. Which that would be a good selling point too.
Yeah. Well, I know one of the other things that you talked about, last session passed the Red Tape Reduction Act, kind of signaled that as kind of 1.0 of that
Right.
kind of effort to, streamlining, burdens on districts, removing some of those redundant or unnecessary, compliance-driven kinds of activities that our districts have to do. And oftentimes we hear things about administrative bloat and that
Yeah.
there's too many people at the central office, too many administrators in schools. But I try to remind your colleagues that most of those are a function of state and federal laws that, so if you want to see
Right.
less administration, you know, remove a lot of that. And I know you've challenged us to give you some of those.
Right.
You know, what additional regulatory reporting requirements do you think could be reduced, next to free up more time for teaching and learning, and how can we help you in that effort?
Well, Jim, we've looked at that over and over, and a lot of those guidelines are federal. And so if that changes, if they think, if we get block grants now and say the states are to spend the money, I honestly think that would help us. I think we could do a better job here in the state regulating spending our money than have regulations that maybe affect New York City, Chicago, somewhere like that. So a lot of those are federal, but any of the ones at state level, we're open. And Shane Baker's been working on this, and I think he may have a few more. And then what my colleagues need to be mindful of, we pass a red tape reduction, and then we pass Senate Bill 181. Somebody's got to monitor that. Somebody's got, and it's just, we're sometimes we just can't help ourselves, I think. And, that I think there's going to be some revision to that. I don't know if she's going to be the one to do it, but I know on our side, I've had call after call in the off session. And I simply say, look, it didn't come through education, and there's a reason why, you know, so anyway, we're a lot of us are mindful of those kind of things, and if we can do stuff like that that makes our teachers' job easier, if you all help us, give us ideas, we'll certainly try to get those passed.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue to work on that. Sometimes it's hard weeding that garden, but if we'll lean into it and connect it to that administrative
Exactly.
pressure that we face, as superintendents and school leaders, we need to make sure they connect that message. And to your point, a lot of these laws that have passed are well intentioned, but they come with all these kind of ramifications that need
Right.
to be, understood. And that's why we've asked for a fiscal note or financial impact statement on all education bills, so that there's no unfunded mandates can
Right.
occur. And for any legislation that touches such a wide swath of the education community, that probably needs a couple sessions to be
Oh
vetted
yeah.
more fully, because this session there were several bills that became very complicated. The one you mentioned on traceable communications, the moral education bill, just complications that needed a little bit more time and
Right.
thought in those. So we appreciate that. Well, finally, what message would you like Kentucky superintendents to take back to their districts about the General Assembly's commitment to public education, and how can we help you in your role as the House Education Chairperson?
Well, and I've mentioned this and said this on other events with you, Jim. But the biggest thing, and I know it's hard because there's personalities and different personalities, and these people have voted away maybe that we didn't feel like they should want. But these are the people that we need to get on our side. The ones that I'm going to support public education. Steve Riley is. Kevin Jackson is. There's a handful that we're going to, we'll go to our grave for public education. But we need to get more of those others that maybe never went to a public school, or their kids have never went to a public school. And pretty much I'm hoping that this private public debate is over as far as funding. So we need to put all that in the past, and we need to work together to move our public school system forward that benefits all Kentuckians. So when you hear them say, well, their district office is bloated or whatever, just, have them come in, set a meeting up with them, take the OEA book that we get every year, and school districts get too. It tells every single school district's administrative cost, teacher salaries, all that. And so when they come in my office and say, well, Jefferson County is blah, 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 blah. I said, well, let's get the stats out and we'll see. Then you show them and they're like, okay, well, that's not what I thought, so we, we need to be on the offensive that way. And we need to sell our districts, and we need to sell the good things that we do. We expect those things. So we don't really toot our own horn enough, but our general public doesn't know day to day what goes in the school system. So that's the number one thing. If we want to get things passed and so forth, we need to have those relationships with our legislators.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's something that, we're trying to make sure we do. And one of the things that, as the executive director, serving our superintendents in this role, when I'm in Frankfurt, a lot of times Greg Coker and I are going around visiting with you and your colleagues. One of the things we love hearing is that I have my superintendent on speed dial, or I
Yeah.
call my superintendent regularly to, check with them before I vote on a bill. And so a lot of them are leaning in on us. So, but we'll continue to work on that. And we appreciate
Yes,
you.
can I make a couple more comments, Jim?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
had some bullets here that I want to get your all's and just throw this out there. And
Okay.
the governor's on this pre-K and has been around and all that. Well, there's not much appetite amongst my colleagues probably to do that. But I tell you what, I think we do need to be looking at, and we do need to get more of our kids exposed to pre-K. The sooner the better. But if you remember Representative Riley's bill we ran that bill 3 or 4 years, haven't in the last couple. But if we could move that poverty level up to 200%, that might catch some of these middle income people that they can't afford to send their kids to daycare. They make just an over the line amount of money to be able to get them in because they don't have a disability or so forth. And I think it would allow more people to work too, because they can't afford to pay for childcare at the level income. So anyway, just your all's thoughts on, do you think that would be a good thing in your all's district to take that next step and get those next, lower to middle, that are right on that bubble, and at least move the needle some that way. And
Yeah.
then, there needs to be more conversation about, I know our Boys and Girls Club here is doing a lot of things, but any partnerships maybe in their communities that in was it United Way of Southern Kentucky? I thought that was a good thing they're doing there in Warren County, where they're going out in some of these homes and actually talking to the parents on maybe giving them some books or some things like that. But anything we can do to help our kids, it was 48% ready for kindergarten, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe it went up a little bit, but anyway, just thoughts amongst your people on that when you
Yeah.
have time. And I do know that I've been in enough rooms where pre-K for all, we can't get our people to support that. So, and we don't have, probably in a lot of our districts, we don't have the capacity building wise right now for that. But I do think we need to come up with some ways to touch more kids, and the sooner the better.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, for a long time, we've, collectively has supported expanding voluntary preschool.
Yeah.
And, and we certainly recognize, some of the challenges with space, having the workforce to serve those classrooms, and making sure that there's sustainable funding, for it. And then also in some communities, there's a lot of private, providers that, that their livelihood depends on that as well. So having that flexibility for public-private, partnerships is important. But we have long supported Representative Riley's, call to expand it, eligibility, and that would be a natural step forward. And we'd want the greatest flexibility in every community to be able to implement when they're ready and capable,
Right.
not to be mandated to implement on some timeline that'll put them in a bad spot.
Right.
So that's kind of where we are on it. But you're
Yeah.
right. The floor determines the ceiling, and the more kids that we can support to be ready for school when they enter kindergarten, the better our outcomes on the other end will be. So any way we can help on that, I think you would find wide support. We surveyed our superintendents. I'll share this data with you on the pre-K expansion, and
Mhm.
all of those things that I just mentioned kind of came up, but there was wide support for looking for ways to do that with the maximum flexibility. So,
Right. Good.
well, thanks again for joining us, and thanks again for your steadfast commitment. Billy Parker made a comment in that sometimes there are legislators who say they support our schools, but then their actions might make it a little bit less clear if they really do. But that he makes a statement that that's never been a case with Representative Lewis, and says a thank you for your support and honest communications with superintendent. So and I echo that sentiment. But anyway, on behalf of KASS, thanks for joining us. And again, thanks for all your work and leadership, and let us know how we can help you and be of assistance as we prepare for the 2026 session.
Well, just make sure your members know too, Jim, they can contact me anytime they need to. And I know you do, you contact me regularly, but for some kind of question or something that they're having problems with in their district, just, one thing I love to do is talk to other superintendents, or, I still remember what it was like. And
Yeah.
I don't know, the years are going by now and it's being less and less, but they've got a much harder job than you and I had, Jim. I really
Oh, I
believe
know
that.
it.
And our jobs were tough, and we had our challenges. We never had any money, and you know that. I mean, we back in the days we didn't have the kind of money, and I know the money doesn't go as far, but boy, we struggled several years. But anyway, just make them aware, if the ones aren't on here or something, they can call me anytime.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate that, and thanks again. And we'll stay in touch.
Okay.
And good luck with your golf match today. So,
I hope I hit them straight.
well, I'm sure you will. All right. Thanks.
See you. Okay.
All right.
Thank you all. Bye.
Yeah, I'll just
We'll
very
toggle
briefly
over to Owen
remind
Saylor
everybody
for
that
final
we've got our annual
updates,
conference coming
and then
up
we'll close out this
December
KASS
7, 8,
live. So,
9.
Owens.
And listen, today is the last day for you to get the guaranteed room rate. So jump in there. Make sure you save a little money, and get your registration done and get your room reservations made. Don't forget the SBA breakfast we've got coming up Saturday, February 21st at the Galt House. We'll start at 7:30 a.m. as usual. Always a great time to get together, share a good meal, and just get updates from folks and news happening around KSS. And of course, the Summer Summit, looking ahead. I mean, isn't it amazing? We'll be there soon. We'll be praying for cooler weather before long. June 8 and 9 at the Marriott City Center in Lexington. Of course, got a lot of other things going on. Really appreciate everybody's support for Kentucky Leadership Rising 25 in that group this year. Amazing group, and other things coming down the pike. A lot of really great stuff heading down your way in terms of leadership development. So appreciate that, Jim. Great job today. And tell you what, it'd be really nice to get Scott maybe to do a session for us on interacting with legislators. But it's really rare that we have a former superintendent as the chair of the education committee. And what a chance for us to be able to learn what's the right way for us to connect with our legislators. What's the right way to come at them? What's the right way to position? And maybe a great way to, again, develop and further this best connection we've had with legislators probably during my professional lifetime. Thanks to you and folks like Scott Lewis, we've really got a chance to leverage that relationship. Thanks, Jim.
All right. Well, thanks, Owens, and thanks everybody for joining us. And I sent out the KASS update via our email. And if you aren't getting that, let me know, because we want to make sure you're getting that information. Not long ago, I Heard from a superintendent who met with their legislator and they had missed the KASS update and got kind of, kind of got caught in the crossfire of the fund balance report that we had talked about at the summit, and also I'd sent out in my update message, and wasn't fully prepared for that. And so if you aren't getting those updates, let me know, because we try to keep you informed and equipped for things like communicating with your legislators effectively, along with other things. So today we talk about the budget and the importance of the budget, and give you some talking points that can hopefully help leading up to the session, along with some other great information. So let me know about that if for some reason you're not getting it. Otherwise, let us know how we can help, and have a great rest of your Friday and an even better weekend. Thanks, everybody.